Okay, there we are.
Mm.
So I've got all these little things to get rid of. I've got this meeting is being recorded right in the middle of my screen. Get rid of you.
Yes, and probably people will
Yep.
find it easier to remove their
minimize the gallery. There we are.
Gallery always gets in the way.
Okay then, well, good afternoon everybody and welcome back to the life and times of the £1.50 Pétain. I can't remember how far I got through. I think it was about 7 or 8 slides, but I'm going to start from the beginning again, obviously, because we've got quite a few more members this time who've joined the meeting than we did on the last occasion. So then, this presentation is of World War II material, franked almost without exception by the £1.50 issue of 1942, which portrays Philippe Pétain, Marshal of France, an honour that was bestowed upon him in 1918 after he led the French army to victory at Verdun. 22 years on, in 1940, after the Germans had broken through the Allied defences, Pétain was called in to be advisor to the Ministry of War. And as the situation deteriorated, Pétain's influence increased. He replaced Paul Reynaud as Prime Minister, and with the surrender of France, replaced Albert Lebrun as head of state. The Third Republic was dissolved. France was divided between the German-occupied zone in the north and the west, and the unoccupied zone in the south and the east. And that was where Pétain established the seat of his puppet government in Vichy. The famous revolutionary principles of liberty, equality, fraternity were replaced by work, family, fatherland, considered to be more symbolic of Pétain's new Révolution nationale, which you can see on the poster on the left. I feel that the cover, the letter on the right, with the excuse me, the image of Pétain struck by a Feldpost cancellation, symbolizes the ignominy of this great soldier, the Lion of Verdun, now under the Nazi yoke. Just one or two, excuse me, non-philatelic items here. As I said, Pétain and his puppet government moved to Vichy, and Pétain himself was located to the Hôtel du Parc, and the yellow circle there highlights the room that he had in the building. It was room number 124, and the top right you can see that building today, or that room today. Hasn't really changed much, but the interior has changed because the Vichy authorities now are gradually turning it into a Vichy stroke Pétain museum. But the nice item at the bottom, which I was pleased to get from my collection, is the pass, which allowed Pétain's personal secretary to enter the building. A couple of items here addressed to Marshal Pétain one item to Marshal Pétain. But on the left, we've got an item from the Vichy government. And of course, no longer being a republic, it's a state. So the heading on the envelope is État français. And we'll rather find their Vichy cancellation. Mail coming into Vichy, and here's an example of the official registration rate that was permitted on mail to the head of state. So for the price of the regular letter rate, you could get your letter sent registered without having to pay an extra charge. The idea of this was to encourage people to notify Pétain of any suspicions they had of what was going on that was anti-Vichy. So it did ensure that such mail got to him. But not everyone who took in their mail to a post office wanted to be seen as sending mail off to Vichy. And so they would simply put it through the letterbox in the evening or during the night and it will be picked up in the morning, and hence that's why we've got Trouvé à la boîte stamped on the cover. The Vichy government enjoyed the privilege, as did neutral and Axis countries, of having an embassy in Paris. This enabled the Vichy government to communicate directly with the German authorities and to operate essential services such as the welfare of prisoners of war. And the above cover on the left-hand side there bears the cachet of the Vichy embassy, which was located in the Rue Courtambert. And the letter, as you can see, is addressed to the Swiss Red Cross and is cancelled by the date stamp of the Office for Official Mail. And likewise, Axis countries established embassies in Vichy, as did neutral countries such as the USA and Turkey, until they entered the war. And here we have mail from the Italian embassy in Vichy to the Colonies in Avignon. But what is interesting is the actual stamp itself, which has got the most remarkable perfin, which is right in the center of Pétain's head there in the form of a star. It's not listed anywhere, that particular star. You can find something similar on earlier Sage issues, but this seems to be peculiar to the Italian embassy. And it's also, the stamp is tied to the envelope with a contrôle mark. The photo of the top left corner was taken on the 24th of October 1940 at the railway station at Montoire-sur-le-Loire. And it became, this photograph became a damning piece of evidence against Pétain. The handshake between Hitler and Pétain, which was simply a matter of protocol between two heads of states, was exploited by the foreign press across the world as a symbol of collaboration. The cover on the right, which is a forwarded cover, is an uncommon, I won't call it rare, it's an uncommon example of a Hitler and a Pétain stamp meeting together on an item of correspondence. Here we have on the left a drop letter, not a drop letter, drop mail. It was dropped by the RAF over France at the time of the French capitulation, basically pointing out to the French what they had given up to the Germans. But that map there is very simplistic. It just shows one line going across France. And this is how many people think of the demarcation. That it was simply north and south, the north being occupied by German troops, the south being free of German troops and run by the Vichy government. But if you look on the detailed map on the right-hand side, you'll say it was quite different to this. You've got in the extreme north part of France that was administered by the Germans from Belgium. It was part of the Belgian administration area. You've got Alsace and part of Lorraine annexed to Germany. You had got the Atlantic Wall to the west, and then the free zone. There was still an occupied area there. On the eastern side, areas occupied by the Italians or even annexed by the Italians. So much more complex than that dropped leaflet would indicate. Just looking at some of the areas then that were occupied. We start then with or in this case, annexed. We've got here a photograph of a workman in Alsace who was in the process of the Germanization of Alsace, that is to say, replacing the French language by the German language. The German language became the official language to be taught in schools, and all signs and road signs, addresses had to be in German, and people were even encouraged to Germanize their names. So Henri would become Heinrich, for example. And the letter on the right is sent at the foreign letter rate, express letter rate, because it's no longer in France. And it's addressed to number 7 Schildegasse. And if you look on the bottom left-hand side, you'll see the history of this very road. In 1817, it was the Rue de Bouclier, and thereafter it changed its name as the Germans came and went. And eventually in 1945, it was returned to the Rue de Bouclier and still is. Now we're here in the south of France, where the Italian occupation and annexation took place. You can see there in the top left-hand corner a photograph of Italian troops arriving in Nice. They don't exactly look particularly threatening, and compared to the panzer divisions that arrived in the north, I would regard those as totally harmless. But the card from the bottom is interesting. This is mail from France to Italy. The postcard is from Mougins, which is in the Italian-occupied Alpes-Maritimes, and it is to Milan with the Italian censor. So that has gone. That's gone direct then from that from Mougins to Milan. Mail to Italy that was not posted within the Italian area had to go to Lyon first, then Lyon to Geneva, and then from Geneva down to Milan and other parts of Italy. And the letter on the right is from Ouche, beg your pardon, it's from Asbrook, beg your pardon, Asbrook to Menton, which was in the occupied zone, and the postmark on the back, it's only very faint, I'm afraid, but the important words are clear enough. Montone zona occupata. Now we've got 2 items of mail. Mail was not allowed to cross from the occupied to the unoccupied zone and vice versa. On the left-hand side here, we've got a letter from Lyon to La Bourboule, and both of those are inside the unoccupied zone. However, the sender has used headed stationery with the printed address in the occupied zone. And so the publisher, Flammarion, has confirmed the letter's origin in the free zone with its own cachet ZL for zone libre. And the bottom right-hand side is a 1942 letter from Ouche in the free zone, which has an ambiguous address, which has confused the postal sorter. The last line has been read as Montignac, Charente, which is in the occupied zone. And so the letter has been returned to sender as undeliverable. And that's rather a fine cachet there. That would be a post office cachet, unlike the private one in the previous letter. But the intended destination was not Montignac. And if you look closer, it is in fact Martigues, which is near Marseille. And the word, what the postal sorter thought was Charente, is in fact Caronte, which is the name of the canal district where the recipient lived. The demarcation line followed the course of the river Allier as it passed through Moulins, thereby dividing the city of Moulins between the 2 zones. However, residents living 10 kilometers on either side of the line could request an Ausweis, a pass for small border traffic, which allowed them to cross over the Aigues-Mortes bridge, which connected Moulins proper, which you can see in the distance, on the right bank, and the suburb of La Madeleine on the Vichy left bank. And below the postcard there, you can see two German soldiers actually putting up the sign for the checkpoint in Moulins. Nevertheless, the refusal of mail was as rigorous here as elsewhere along the line of demarcation. And the letter on the right, which was posted in Moulins on the 18th of January 1942, in an attempt to reach an address in La Madeleine, a distance of only 1.2 kilometers across the bridge, was returned to the sender the following day. The photo on the postcard is taken just a few meters from this very house where the letter would have been sent. Despite the ban on civilian interzone mail, the German and Vichy authorities permitted the exchange of a limited quantity of official mail, particularly letters of urgency and of economic importance. And such mail was exchanged on the demarcation line on the bridge crossing the Allier between Moulins and La Madeleine. It was the main crossing for mail between the two zones. The letter on the left is from the Chamber of Commerce in Mâcon, in the free zone, to Tourcoing in the occupied zone, and has been dispatched via Vichy with an urgent correspondance économique label in deep pink, and the cachet of the Secretary of State for Industrial Production, and the stamp has been cancelled by the Vichy contreseing, the counter-signature date stamp, used by the Vichy office responsible for the forwarding of mail to the occupied zone. The cover is back stamped 1 day later with the date stamp of the Bureau du Courrier Officiel, the Office for Official Mail in Paris, from where it was forwarded to Tourcoing. So any mail of this nature then that was crossing from one zone to the other was tracked very, very carefully. And on the right-hand side, from the 18th of August 1942, there was the organisation for the exchange of some German mail. It was undertaken by the German insurance company Victoria under the auspices of the Centre for German Economic Organisations in France. And the envelope you see there is from Paris in the occupied zone to Nice in the free zone. Nice was just was outside, that was in the free zone compared to the German occupied. I know the Italians were there, but there's the bilingual cachet of the centre, and you can see that in both German and French. And the stamp is cancelled by the Paris Postal Coordination Officer date stamp, and the return address in the free zone is quoted on the reverse of the envelope. So again, with hand stamps and postmarks and cachets on the reverse of the envelope, the letter has been tracked very, very accurately indeed. There were direct postal communications between some French colonies and Vichy France. But much had been suspended due to military action. But nevertheless, contact could be re-established with the aid of the Red Cross in Geneva. On the left, you can see the Red Cross cachets, which record the items dispatched from Casablanca, its transit through Geneva, and then its onward transmission to Toulouse via Vichy. So you've got the Casablanca cachet at the top, the Geneva one bottom left, and of course the Vichy one right in the middle. The Agence économique des colonies, the colonial trade agency at Vichy, operated a radio station for the reception of messages from expats in the French colonies. The message was then written down on a form, a pre-typed form, and then it was forwarded in the style of a telegram to its destination. But any reply to the colony could only be sent under the auspices of the Red Cross. And the message shown here, just above the letter, you've got the contents of the telegram. And the message shown here was received at Vichy on the 14th of October 42 from a family in French Equatorial Africa. Now, on the left here, we've got a cover whose journey I've yet to unravel. From 1940 to 1943, Guadeloupe remained loyal to the Vichy regime, but as the island was almost surrounded by British possessions and troops, it didn't pose a threat to the Allies. There was constant resistance to the Vichy regime on the island itself, ranging from simply defacing Pétain posters and road signs to minor military uprisings. And on 15th of July 1943, the island did in fact rally to General de Gaulle and the Free French. But it's difficult to ascertain what actually happened to this letter that was sent to Guadeloupe. It was posted in Lyon in the Free Zone on the 9th of September 1942, and we assume was transported from Marseille to Guadeloupe on one of the CGT shipping lines, the Compagnie Générale Transatlantique, some of which were permitted still by the Germans. The censor tape on the left indicates it was examined en route by a British examiner. I say en route because after sticking the sealing tape on, the examiner has just quickly written the GU that's needed to complete the name Guadeloupe in the address. And that wouldn't have been necessary if it had arrived there already. So examined en route then. Not sure though how. But the point is the tape does not have the attributes of the Bermuda censor. Was it therefore intercepted and held perhaps by a censor elsewhere until Guadeloupe rallied to de Gaulle, after which the Guadeloupe post office eventually returned the item to France, because the back of the envelope is stamped a year later, on the 3rd of September 1943. On the right, we have the other side of the world, an item here that's been sent from France to Saigon, Indochina. Indochina remained loyal to the Vichy regime for the full duration of the war, but only under duress. On September the 22nd, 1940, the colony signed an accord with Japan, which granted the basing and transitive rights basing and the transit rights during its war against China. But within days, the accord was contravened when Japan launched its Indochina campaign and occupied the country. Relations with Vichy were limited, and severe restrictions were imposed on both incoming and outgoing mail, as indicated by this letter from Paris to Saigon. The sender has attempted to send a letter only to have it returned with a cachet, explaining that mail to Indochina was limited to unregistered postcards. Bottom left-hand side of the screen, you can see a postcard depicting the battleship Richelieu. The battleship Richelieu was launched in 1939, and on the 1st of January 1940, its onboard postal agency became operational. But with the capitulation of France, the Richelieu fled from Brest on the 18th of June to avoid falling into German hands, and arrived in Dakar in Senegal 10 days later. In September 1940, it defended pro-Vichy Senegal against the combined British and Free French attacks of Operation Menace. But it did get damaged in the process. It remained in Dakar until January 1943, when, following the rallying of French West Africa to de Gaulle and the Allied cause, it set sail for New York for refitting. Now, back to the postal agency, you can see from the cover that the ship's postal agency used a regular hexagonal Bâtiment de Ligne Richelieu date stamp for cancelling its mail, most of which was addressed to France. Occasionally, correspondence is found addressed to foreign destinations, such as this rather extraordinary letter, which has succeeded reaching a French nun working in England. And it travelled from Dakar via Casablanca, Marseille, Lisbon, and eventually flown into Bristol Whitchurch. It was a dangerous journey. Any flights across from Lisbon to Bristol were dangerous. And in fact, Leslie Howard, the star of Gone with the Wind, lost his life when the BOAC aircraft he was flying in was shot down by German fighters in 1943. But I think it's lovely to think that we've got somebody in Dakar writing to a French nun in a French convent at Bitter near Southampton. Nice bit of mail. Right, I move away from the colonies now to look at prisoners and prisons and prisoners of war. The photograph on the left is of the Cherche Midi military prison, which was in the 6th arrondissement of Paris. It's now been pulled down. And in 1894, famously witnessed the trial and detention of Alfred Dreyfus. During World War II, the prison was used by the Gestapo for the internment of political opponents, resistance workers, and agents. Each prisoner was issued with a correspondence permit stating his case file number, and that little permit is at the bottom of the screen. This number was then forwarded by the prisoner to his family, and that number had to be quoted on all incoming and outgoing mail. So you can see on that little permit, you can clearly see his file number 1280/41, and that's repeated in the top left-hand corner of the letter. And this letter is to a captain held in the Cherche Midi prison, and the contents, which I can't display to you, are heart-rending. It's a heart-rending letter from his wife to him. This is an item addressed to Fresnes prison, and Fresnes was located in the southeast outskirts of Paris, and this was under shared French and German administration to house captured British SOE agents and members of the French resistance. Prisoners were held in horrific conditions in dark holes, and they were prisons were interrogated, tortured, and executed. And the letter we see here was sent to a prison on the 23rd of October 1943, and following his execution was returned to the sender 3 months later on the 19th of January 1944. And the back of the envelope is shown down the right-hand side. And as you can see, it is there is a signed manuscript endorsement returned by the German authorities, together with the Fresnes date stamp. And now we come to that's the saddest side of the collaboration between Vichy and Germany. The camp that you see here in the photograph on the left-hand side is the camp at Pithiviers, a small town in the département of Loiret, and it was a transit camp for Jews. It was run jointly by the local authorities and the German authorities. And on the 14th of May 1941, the first contingent of 1,570 male Jews arrived from Paris. And then after the infamous Veldiv raids in Paris, in July 1942, the camp received a further 1,800 Jewish children and parents. The parents were later transferred to Drancy and then to Auschwitz, and the children remained at Pithiviers before being transported directly to Auschwitz, the majority of which were gassed within 24 hours of their arrival. And as all the arrivals there signing in are men, one assumes then this picture was taken from the first contingent that arrived from Paris. The Pithiviers camp was finally closed in July 43, and during its 2 years existence saw an estimated 9,000 Jews go through its gates. The letter is dated the 11th of April 1942 and was written by one of the earlier detainees to the wife that he had left behind in Paris. It's addressed to Madame Blustein or Blustein. Now this is interesting because the spelling is uncertain at the end of his name, I-E-N. It looks as if it's not necessarily written by the person himself. Perhaps he was dictating the letter, because there's no record of a Blustein spelt like that. And if you go onto the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum website, you'll find in their listings, though, records from the Bernard Blustein memoir. He was a survivor, but in his memoir, he records that on June the 25th, 1942, Charles Blustein was deported from Pithiviers on convoy number 4 to Auschwitz concentration camp. So whether they are one of the same people, I do not know. I don't think I'm ever going to be able to find out at this late date. Now we've got covers here associated to a couple of organizations that supported prisoners of war. On the left is a letter and cover from the Central Committee for the Aid to Prisoners of War, which was created in July 1940 to monitor the welfare of French prisoners of war from the occupied zone and to liaise with the Red Cross. The correspondence on the left contains information about food parcel lists, accounting procedures, and the arrival of supplies for distribution the following month. And on the right-hand side is material associated with another organization, the CGPGR, which was the General Commission for Repatriating Prisoners of War. Various fundraising events were organized to raise funds for the repatriated prisoners. And these events included concerts and exhibitions and theatrical performances and the sale of vignettes, poster stamps, the profits of which went into a fund. So upon his return to France, each prisoner of war was presented with his livret du prisonnier, his little bank book, in which was recorded the amount put into his account. And here we've got a livret du prisonnier, which records a deposit of 150 francs at the Caisse d'Épargne in Nancy. And on the right is a 1944 letter with a 2 francs charity label sold by the CGPGR in aid of the livret du prisonnier scheme. The Vichy youth camps were inaugurated by Marshal Pétain as part of his Révolution Nationale campaign. Around 150 such camps were established to accommodate men of conscription age. who received instruction in sport, discipline, and patriotism. The conscripts received 2 stamps a month for their personal correspondence. And the letter here is from the Maréchal Pétain camp at Saint-Bonnet-Tronchet, which contains a letter in it contains references to orders received from the Germans for the transfer of the men in the camp to factories in Rouen and Lille. And the little inset there is, as I say, an enlargement of the heading, not only on the envelope, but on the letter that was enclosed. And on the right-hand side, we've got an item from a forced labour camp, the Service du Travail Obligatoire, or the Compulsory Work Service, STO, was the forced enlistment and deportation of hundreds of thousands of French workers into Nazi Germany in order to work as forced labour for the German war effort. Germany set up the STO to compensate for its loss of manpower, as it enlisted more and more of its own men to fight on the Eastern Front. The German government promised that for every 3 French workers sent over, they would release 1 French prisoner of war. So it was very attractive to Pétain to participate in this scheme. Those requisitioned under the STO were accommodated in work camps on German soil, but many French defected and joined the resistance movement. The item here is addressed to a French worker at the camp attached to the Karl Borgward factory in Bremen. And Borgward was a manufacturer of trucks and luxury cars. And after joining the Nazi Party, he contributed to the German war effort by manufacturing military vehicles and armaments. And when the factory was destroyed by Allied bombing in 1944, half of its workforce consisted of prisoners of war and forced labourers who obviously lost their lives. I could show pages and pages of censored mail, but I've just picked out a couple of items here because they are examples of double censorship, which I always find intriguing. On the 26th of August 1940, the French Equatorial Africa, or more specifically the colony of Chad within French Equatorial Africa, which was led by its governor, Félix Éboué, was the first African territory to rally to the Free French. And by October the same year, most of French Equatorial Africa had aligned with de Gaulle, who thereafter established his headquarters while in Brazzaville in the French Congo. Now, this 1942 cover on the left was sent from Vichy via Lisbon to South Africa, where it was censored by the South African authorities, then redirected to Brazzaville in the French Congo, whereupon it was censored again by the Free French and sealed with the Afrique Française Libre censor tape. The South African tape is on the right. Unfortunately, the Free French one on the left is slightly masked. And the letter on the right from Lyon was posted to Cairo on the 29th of June 1942, but was evidently delayed by the repercussions of the Western Desert Campaign, which had been intensifying since the beginning of July until the Battle of El Alamein, which ended on the 2nd of November. Eventually, the letter arrived in Cairo over 5 months later, on the 9th of December 1942, and the letter was censored by both the British and Egyptian authorities before being delivered the following day. After the fall of France, the Vichy authorities deemed that slogan postmarks, especially those frivolously promoting tourism or publicising entertainment to be inappropriate. And in a directive dated the 30th of September 1940, sorting offices were instructed to cease using slogan cancellations unless they were related to postal services or promoted patriotic initiatives. The choice of alternative cancellations was left to the discretion of the individual sorting office, some of whom were more resourceful than others. For example, on the left here, the office at Lodève recommissioned a straight line but very defective canceller, which was fitted to its Krag cancelling machine, and the heavy obliteration was applied to outgoing mail for over 2 years before complaints from the public compelled the office to replace it. Some sorting offices retrieved obsolete slogan cancellers, but before fitting them, the machine operators were instructed to file away or block any censored text. The main sorting office at Toulouse resurrected a slogan canceller which had been used to promote the 1937 Paris exhibition, and after deleting the text, fixed it to the office's RBV cancelling machine, and it was used in 1941 and 1942. At the top of the screen, you can see the original 1937 slogan, and on to the right, the defaced version. Some of you will have seen slogan postmarks promoting frivolous things in France, even after this instruction was issued, and they're usually in the form of the Daguin cancellations, and they're very much sought after. But they were from offices which only had a Daguin machine and only perhaps the one Daguin cancellation, and there was nothing much they could do about it. As a result of an acute paper shortage, the Vichy government promoted slogan postmarks, which advocated measures to reduce paper consumption. And here we've got examples of how people were able to recycle paper. On the top left-hand side, you've got the actual slogan postmark that was used, le papier est rare, économisez-le. And then the top left, or on the left-hand side, you've got a beautiful envelope that is made from an old ordnance map. And then the right-hand side, an envelope which has been folded out of a sheet of railway parcel labels for correspondence between two station masters. And below that, a letter folded into itself to form a very small triangular entire. At the outbreak of World War II, the French Navy possessed the world's fourth strongest fleet. But following France's defeat, the Navy was confined to its harbours under French control, and Toulon was one such harbour. To raise morale, the Vichy government nevertheless decided to record a pre-war slogan postmark: Notre empire veut une marine forte et toujours prête. Our empire demands a powerful and vigilant navy, which was used in sorting offices in both the occupied and free zones. But in November 1942, in response to Allied landings in French North Africa, the Germans swept down into the free zone, threatening possession of the French fleet in Toulon. And upon the orders of the Vichy Admiralty, over 60 vessels were therefore scuttled in Toulon harbour to avoid capture by the German forces. And there is that incident being reported in the Daily Mirror. French Navy's sacrifice redeems nation's honour. Rather nice heading there. The sorting offices, though, were therefore instructed to immediately withdraw this slogan cancellation, which obviously was now rather embarrassingly inappropriate. But some officers were slow in doing it, and this cover dated the 30th of November 1942, post dates by 3 days, the sinking of the fleet and the instruction for the slogan's withdrawal. Now, here's an example of an insignificant cover philately, which cost us a couple of euros, but is important historically. In September 1943, on 2 occasions, American bombers targeted the port and industrial facilities of Nantes, but collateral damage included portions of the city centre, which were razed to the ground. The raids killed 1,247 civilians and destroyed over 2,000 buildings, with the centre declared a zone sinistre, a disaster area, and almost 20,000 people were left homeless, and 70,000 people subsequently abandoned the city. It was very much a deserted city for the rest of the war. Now, this is a letter from Nîmes to the Rue de l'Arche-Sèche in Nantes, and is addressed to a resident in the zone sinistre, and has been annotated by the postman as such in the top left-hand corner, where you can, it's just in fact says sinistre, which is an explanation for it not being delivered and having to be returned. So that was returned to centre as undeliverable. But on the right, in the current photograph, we can see that very house. This is number 2, Rue de l'Arche-Sèche, which is now being rebuilt on the remains of the original dwelling. And you can see very clearly the original and the new stonework in the photograph. We're now going to see a couple of examples of an undercover mail. This is an example of the Thomas Cook and Son undercover mail. The mail could be sent covertly from France to Britain through an undercover service operated by Thomas Cook using their PO box number 506. You can't see that very clearly, so I've enhanced the image, and you've got on the bottom right hand side, you can see the 506 and the Thomas Cook stamp on the envelope behind the yellow label. Now, this 1942 cover then was flown then to the Thomas Cook office in London, where it was readdressed and the cachet applied. A Tottenham Halfpenny stamp with a Thomas Cook and Son perfin was affixed, and the letter put into the British postal system for delivery to Surbiton. And there's an enlargement of the perfin top right hand side. From 1942, the Portuguese Red Cross was also involved illicitly in the operation of forwarding undercover mail from France to Britain. And this 1942 cover was sent covertly to René Cassin, a key member and advisor to Charles de Gaulle, who was with his government in exile in London. The letter was addressed to him under his pseudonym, Monsieur R. Cazeneuve, and sent to the Portuguese Red Cross via its PO box, which has been subsequently deleted on the cover. I've not been able to find out what the number was. In Lisbon, from where it was forwarded by post to London. And here it was readdressed and examined by British Censor 1119 and Free French Censor 2 before being delivered to him at number 4 Carlton Gardens, the headquarters of General de Gaulle. And Cassin is featured in the photograph on the right-hand side, and he's the bearded gentleman on de Gaulle's left in the photograph. De Gaulle's supporters in France were not only involved in acts of resistance, but also in forging stamps. Imitating Berthier's Pétain design, vignettes bearing the portrait of General de Gaulle and with the RF monogram were circulated in Nice during 1943 by the local resistance group. And there's an example of it, the bottom left-hand side. Ostensibly intended for use as a propaganda label, some of them were nevertheless genuinely used to prepay mail, including threat mail sent to collaborators, such as this visiting card. And the collaborator in this particular case is the editor of the pro-Vichy newspaper, L'Alerte, in Nice. And you can see that in the bottom left-hand side of the newspaper heading, it gives the address 29 Avenue de la Victoire, which is the address on the envelope. And inside this envelope then was the message, the card that was sent to the editor, which when translated reads, "The nation needs all its sons in order to be saved. Traitor to the homeland, you have turned into the invader's accomplice. As from now, the whole nation is aware of your deeds. Your file, already very full, is in good hands. Your days are numbered. Signed, the Resistance." Now, I've had this happen before. I seem to, no. I've jumped. Unfortunately, I've missed a slide out there, but I can't get back to it. I'll proceed. Okay, moving on then. Corsica was the first metropolitan department to be liberated in World War II. The first Free French troops landed on Corsica on the 12th of September 1943, and with subsequent Allied reinforcements, as you can see in the top photograph, and backed by the Corsican resistance, the Maquis, shown in the bottom photo, they were able to liberate the whole island by the 4th of October. The Ajaccio newspaper, La Patriote, demanded the withdrawal of all Pétain stamps, but this could not be achieved until replacement stocks were received from Algeria in December. So this cover there, although it postdates the liberation of Corsica, still bears Pétain stamps. So the cover we see here was censored in Ajaccio, dated November 43, and was probably flown from Corsica to Algiers on the reopened Air France service, then from Algiers to Cairo by military planes, where it was finally transferred to the Syria to Madagascar line, which stopped en route in Djibouti. The letter arrived in Djibouti on the 3rd of December 43, from where it was redirected to Harar in Ethiopia, just after all Italian guerrilla resistance there had been quelled. I said at the beginning that probably flown by this route. This is a route that was worked out for me by Barbara and by John. On the 1st of February 44, the Force Française de l'Intégrité, the FFI, was created by combining the various resistance units and regrouping them into military zones, with the leaders given the authority to operate over each département. Prior to the Allied invasion of Provence on the 15th of August 44, one of the responsibilities of the local FFI was the censorship of mail. And the above letter from the Département of the Drôme has been intercepted by the Ardèche FFI, censored and resealed before being forwarded to its destination. And on the right-hand side, we've got quite an attractive member of the FFI. The Anglo-American air raids, which preceded the Allied invasion of Normandy, seriously damaged the road and rail network and disrupted the transport of mail. And this was further exacerbated by an acute shortage of petrol. In some regions, an express mail service operated by volunteer cyclists was devised to ensure continuity and to provide a reliable means of delivering mail from office to office. Bicycle express services were usually operated by youth volunteers, but in Laval, which is the example here, manpower was provided by the Maison de Prisonniers, an organisation responsible for the rehab of POWs. This service only operated during the last 2 weeks of July, and this cover is dated the 20th of July 1944, and for the first few days of August. And similarly, as the Allied forces headed towards Paris, normal postal services in and around the capital was severely disrupted. And the Secours National, the National Relief Organization, operated an emergency postal service both within Paris, as shown by the letter on the right, and to the battle zone in August, and possibly even earlier in July. Paris was liberated on the 25th of August 1944, and the above letter appears to be from a member of the resistance. The DF cachet, I assume, represents the Paris Défense de la France resistance group. And inside is the sender's simple message dated the 26th of August 1944, which reads, "The best days of my life, long live de Gaulle, long live France, and long live the Allies." This was an item that I bought it was one of the unsolds in a Cine auction many years ago, and possibly unsold because the cachet was rather a faint one. But it was only when I received and I bought it as an unsold, and it was only when I looked inside that I found that message tucked away there. And that wasn't mentioned in the lot description at all. But yeah, I think that increases its value historically immensely. On 3rd of June 44, while located in Algeria, Charles de Gaulle had been nominated President of the French Republic and provisional government. And shortly after the liberation of Paris, he formed shortly after the liberation of Paris on the 20th of August, the provisional government was reshuffled, and in September 44, to form a government of national unity. De Gaulle remained at its head until his resignation on the 20th of January 46, prior to the creation of the Fourth Republic. And the cover that we see here was sent to him under the recommandation d'office, as we saw with the mail being sent to Pétain. An official postage rate which allowed people to send registered letters to the president at just the basic £1.50 letter rate. Unfortunately, there's a cachet there in red, of which I've only got a frame. I would love to know what the complete cachet was. Patriotism demanded that Pétain's image be overprinted on the stamps to celebrate the liberation and the return of the Republic. And decision to overprint stamps was made locally, but as the lines of communication between the central postal administration in Paris and the regional offices were often disrupted, the correct procedures were not always followed. And what we've got here on the left is the original and sole copy of the decree signed by Monsieur Louis Touab, Mayor of Montreuil-Bellay, sanctioning the overprint of the £1.50 Pétain for his town. The text gives details of the provisional postal service to be operated and announces that the stamps will be put on sale at the local dairy in honour of its owner and the resistance hero Gaston Ami, who died while a German prisoner of war. However, despite the mayoral cachets, the sale of the stamps from other than a post office was later deemed by the PTT as invalidating the issue. So the stamps that we see here are known as the unofficial overprints. But what is quite remarkable is that when the stamps were issued by Montreuil, they were overprinted, as you can see in the top right-hand corner, in blue ink, whereas the one stamp that I've got here on the document was overprinted in purple, the same as the mayoral cachet. So that is a unique stamp. On the left-hand side, you've got the part of a proof sheet of the Lyon RF overprint. It was a huge printing in Lyon because the stamps were required for the whole of the Rhône-Alpes region. And you can see in front of you there a registered letter for local delivery within Lyon, 9th of October 1944. On the right, though, we've got here the Paris overprint, which was only applied to stamps on souvenir covers with the de Gaulle vignette and FFI postmark. I think everyone has seen, or perhaps even owns, one of those covers. Mint copies of that are very scarce, and I do have one, but commercially used copies of this stamp are unknown, except for this one, which again I managed to buy on Delcomp. Is mine genuine? Well, it's going to be shortly referred to the RPSL experts to check if the postmark is over and not under the overprint. Clearly, if the surcharge is over if the surcharge is over the postmark, then it's a forgery. If it's under the postmark, I've got an absolute rarity. I shall just have to be patient until I consult the experts. Now, Bordeaux was chosen for the construction of the Italian submarine base, Pétain, which, capable of accommodating up to 30 submarines, was opened on the 30th of August 1940. And the Italian stationed there were responsible for submarine presence in the Atlantic south of Lisbon. The base remained fully operational until the Italian surrender in September 43, when it was seized by German forces. However, some Italian personnel loyal to Mussolini opted to remain working alongside the Germans. The inscription on the conning tower, which you can see top left, reads, "Whosoever fears dying is unworthy of living." But after the liberation of Bordeaux in September 44, the Italians were rounded up and interned in the prison of war camp at Saint-Médard-en-Jalles on the outskirts of Bordeaux. Now, this camp had originally been built as a French prison and then was used by the Germans to incarcerate all black POWs whom Hitler refused to have transported to Germany. And that photograph at the bottom, as you can see, are the French prisoners there, all of whom are black. The two covers you see there, the one on the left is an example of an item of mail from an Italian prisoner out of the prison, and the top right is an item of incoming mail to an Italian prisoner of war. Whoops. Now this will interest our American friends. Following the US entry into World War II, a special military concession airmail rate of 6 cents per half ounce became available for armed forces personnel stationed outside the continental United States. And the 6-cent transport plane stamp and the 6-cent monoplane postal station envelope were available at Army post offices. Neither, though, was used by the sender of this card, who was in the US 405th Regiment of the 102nd Infantry Division, who were known as the Ozarks. And they arrived in Cherbourg on the 24th of September 1944. Following manoeuvres in Normandy, the division left for the Holland-German border, where it arrived at Vaubach on the 24th of October and was temporarily assigned to the 2nd Armoured Division. Now, here we've got then a postcard that was taken by one of the Ozarks. The route is shown on the map at the bottom of the screen, And the gentleman on the right is an Ozark, but he is not necessarily the sender of the postcard. It just happens to be a photograph I managed to find on the internet. But it's intriguing, this use of the stamp. Although only the equivalent of 3 American cents, the 1 franc 50 Pétain was accepted for postage. And on the 31st of October, it was cancelled at Lichtenberg, just 17 kilometers from Waubach, with the APO 252 duplex of the 2nd Army Division, to which the Ozark sender had been assigned. Everything looks absolutely straightforward, but it's the only example I've seen of a Pétain stamp being used, accepted, passed by, and assumably having reached its American destination. And we're coming now to the closing stages of the war now. On the 31st of July 1944, the American army broke through German lines and advanced to Lorient, which held 10,000 French civilians and 25,000 German personnel. Besieged by American troops and FFI forces, the German garrison at Lorient did not surrender until the 7th of May 1945, after 9 months of siege and sporadic fighting. From mid-August to December 44, postal operations ceased in the Lorient pocket. But in January 1945, Oberleutnant Alphonse Schmidt was detailed by the garrison commander to revive and operate a limited postal service using the Pétain stamps, which elsewhere in France had been demonetized. Schmidt was responsible also for censoring all mail which bears his signature SCH over the dated censor mark. Unusual example here of a cover to Germany censored on the 30th of January 1945. Now, there are all these wonderful tales of mail being smuggled out by little boats and so on and so forth in order to get to mail to Germany, but there is nothing on the back of this envelope to suggest it ever arrived there. On 1st of March 1945, the basic letter rate throughout France was increased from 1 franc 50 to 2 francs. Stamps were already in short supply within the Saint-Nazaire pocket, likewise surrounded by American and French forces. And the problem was intensified by the need for a new value. So the sub-prefect obtained a permission from the regional controller at Nantes for the local Chamber of Commerce to print a local 2 franc letter rate stamp and a 50-cent make-up value, which is shown here, to meet the new tariff. And this letter is sent from Saint-Joachim, from where the letter, which is a small village in the pocket to the north of the Loire, where it was the center for the Red Cross organization of the district, whose activities included the distribution of medical supplies and the transfer of POW mail. And the place it's going to, Saint-Brévin-les-Pins, lies to the south of the Loire. It's a nice example of the pocket of Saint-Nazaire mail. And to the right, you've got the photograph showing German officers arriving on the 8th of May 1945 at the level crossing of Cordemais, which is 40 kilometers east of Saint-Nazaire, to discuss the terms of surrender with American officers. The surrender was signed at 1330 and the ceasefire came into force at 1400. And these two photographs come from a selection which Jeff Gethin, who you remember, who was very interested in World War II, and which his dear wife gave to me after he had died. And finally, after the war, Marshal Pétain's trial opened on the 23rd of July 1945, and on the 15th of August, he was found guilty of collaboration and high treason and was condemned to death. However, de Gaulle immediately commuted the sentence to solitary confinement for life. This was obviously in response to what Pétain had achieved during World War One. Pétain was incarcerated in the Fort de la Citadelle on the Île d'Yeu, an island 18 kilometers off the Vendée coast in the Bay of Biscay. And here he died at the age of 95 on the 23rd of July, after 6 years after the opening of his trial. And he was buried in the island's marine cemetery. The photograph shows Pétain with his doctor, who, apart from his Pétain's wife, was the only person allowed to visit him. But the cover is of interest. The 1943 cover to Brussels is franked with 3 Pétain issues, including 2 of the 1 franc 50, and cancelled with a circular dated hand stamp of the Île d'Yeu, Vendée. And obviously it's sent by one of the German occupiers of the island, and mail from that island from the German occupiers is not easy to find. But I think it's a wonderful envelope, as it forebodes Pétain's demise. And I think it's a fitting item with which to close this display. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Mick. That was a tour de force, I think we could say. Quite incredible how much you can pack in with one little stamp. Take us through so many different aspects of French history in such a troubled time. Are there any questions? You can all unmute now if you wish.
No questions, just say to Mick.
More commentary.
That was fantastic. Thank you.
No, thank you very much.
There some extraordinary items there, really were.
And I think some of you have seen a bit of that before at Charlcote and places like that, but I'm constantly adding to it. It's one of those collections I just can't leave alone.
Ed Grabowski here, Mick. Have you exhibited this collection?
So have I?
Exhibited it?
Yes, I have. Yes, it did reach. I got an international gold some years ago in Spain. Yeah,
Deservedly so. Yes.
Thank you. No, but my wife is fascinated by World War II. Any book that's published on World War II and World War One, for that matter, she reads it. I think she's more knowledgeable than I am. And sometimes it's her books I dip into to get some information from, provided the book is reliable and written by a renowned author. But that item about the Ozarks, that was from the Ozarks' own website. The Ozarks Veterans website, and found a useful source of information. And there are lots of websites in America put up by the veterans of World War II. Which contain information so useful to philatelists. They don't realise it, but it is.
No, you do find them.
Served in Belgium and died in Belgium, and I was able to trace his course through the website of his unit.
That's right. Yep.
What does Ozark actually stand for, Mick?
Well, the Ozarks are a group. What I call it, mountainous, a very hilly area south of St. Louis. Am I not right, Ed?
Yeah, I think hilly would be the better.
Hilly, yeah.
Than mountainous.
I know that when we landed in St. Louis, there were all these little tiny planes with Ozarks written on the side, so it obviously has its own own airline. Yeah.
The Ozarks are usually associated with Arkansas.
Oh, Arkansas.
Southern Missouri and Arkansas.
Right. Okay. So I'm out by a few miles.
Close enough.
Okay.
Just one thing, Mick, and thanks very much for that. I have a small collection of the issue myself that I was really quite impressed with, and now I realise I might as well not bother.
Oh no,
the comparison is weak. I have quite a few of the British forgery in blocks and things like that, but not
Oh,
on
yes.
cover. Do you have a sideline of those, and have you seen them on cover? Because I never have.
The British forgery, the SOE forgery,
Yeah.
they argue that those were given to SOE agents, just 2 or 3, to put into their wallets. So when they landed in France, if they were discovered, they would be assumed that they were normal French people and so on and so forth. But they couldn't. But the stamps, though, once they were being printed by the SOE, it was realised that the stamps had been printed on top quality British paper.
Yeah.
And therefore they just weren't passable. So they were not actually given to the SOE. They were just squirreled away somewhere, and they came on the market after the war. But there have been covers found. I've got one in a scan of one on my computer somewhere, which was on eBay. It was bought by somebody else, passed on to Cine, and Cine sold it for a phenomenal price. And it was the £1.50 with other, the £1.50 British printing with normal French printings. But how it got to Marseille, how and why, no one knows, unless it's a forgery of a forgery. They do exist. They do exist.
They do exist.
Yeah. Yeah. But there's one slide in when I showed this before. There's one slide I've got on this program that this refuses to come up, and that's the Paris forgeries. Those do come up quite regularly on cover. Provided they're within the dates of usage, then you know they're pretty genuine. But keep your eyes open. You never know. You might find one of the SOE ones used in France.
One day. What I'll do now is I'll turn the recording off now.
Okay.